Rain in Auburn was always special. It was fine, insistent, and seemed to dissolve into the air, not falling in droplets, but just wrapping everything around it in a cold, damp shroud. That was the rain that greeted me when I got off the bus. The town didn't seem to have changed in the 3 years I'd been away. The same gray streets, the same peeling store signs on the main street, the same smell of river slime from the nearby Road River. I stood at the bus stop, clutching the handle of my shabby suitcase, and thought I might not have come back at all. My father had died 2 days ago, suddenly, of a heart attack. We hadn't spoken in the last 2 years. I'd gone to work as a nurse in Portland, escaping the stifling atmosphere of home, the perpetual scandals, my sister's venomous comments, my father's silent disapproval. Kimberly called me Tuesday morning. "He's dead," she said without introduction, in her usual dry tone. "The funeral's Friday at 2, come if you want." And here I am, in this godforsaken little town, on a dank April afternoon, with my hair wet from the rain and a heaviness in my chest. I'm 26, but I felt like I was 16 again, back on Elm Street, 21. It's a 15-minute walk from here to our house. I could have hailed a cab, but for some reason I felt like walking, maybe to delay the moment I met my sister. Our house, a large Victorian mansion with blackened tiles and creaky floorboards, had always seemed like a living thing to me. Old, grumpy, but kind at heart. My father inherited it from his father, and his father from his father. The Thorntons were the 4th generation to live in this house. I pushed the gate open, and it creaked familiarly. The yard was empty and untended. Father had never liked to garden, and since my mother's death 10 years ago, all the flowers had withered away. Only the old oak tree still towered over the house, dropping acorns on the roof in the fall winds. The door opened without waiting for me to knock. Finally, Kimberly stood on the threshold, arms crossed over her chest. At 31, she looked 40. She had sharp lines around her mouth, dull red hair in a tight bun, and piercing green eyes that looked through you. "Hi, Kim." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "Don't call me that." She cut me off. "Come in, you're late. The funeral's in an hour." I walked silently into the house. It smelled like dust, old books, and cinnamon for some reason. It had always smelled like that for as long as I could remember. In the living room, Dalton, Kimberly's husband, was sitting on the couch, lanky, with thinning hair and eyes that were always running. They'd been married 5 years, and I'd only seen him a few times, the wedding and the 2 family dinners I'd been invited to for some reason. "Hazel," he nodded without getting up. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Likewise," I replied, not knowing what else to say. "Where is he?" "Jenkins Funeral Home." Kimberly walked past me, catching my shoulder. "I made the arrangements. The service at St. Matthew's, then the funeral at the city cemetery. Dad wanted to be buried next to Mom." I nodded. Of course she'd organized everything. Kimberly always liked to take responsibility and then blame it on everyone around her. "I'll change and be ready," I said, heading for the stairs. "Your room is now an office," my sister stopped me. "Go to the guest room." I froze with my foot on the first step. My room, the one with the blue wallpaper and the view of the oak tree, was no longer mine. Of course, I should have expected that, but I still felt a prick of resentment. "Okay." I turned around and went to the guest room at the end of the hallway. It was small and impersonal beige walls, a brown bedspread on a single bed, a nightstand with a lamp. I threw my suitcase on the floor and sat on the bed, feeling the tears coming. Not because of my father, our relationship had long been ruled by mutual coldness, but because of the strange feeling that I'd been erased from this house, from the family history. The funeral was a blur. The preacher spoke of eternal life. Neighbors and a few of my father's friends came up to Kimberly and me, shook hands, said the standard words of condolence. Kimberly held herself upright, stone-faced. I saw her squeeze Dalton's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. As the coffin was being lowered into the ground, it rained harder than it had in the morning. The drops pounded the black umbrellas, turning the cemetery into a sea of black domes. I stood without an umbrella, letting the rain mix with the tears on my face. It wasn't that I was grieving much. Rather, I was mourning what had never been between my father and me. The understanding, the closeness, the support, all of that remained in the realm of the unfulfilled. After the cemetery, everyone returned to our house. Mrs. Wilcox, a neighbor, brought a casserole. Someone else brought apple pie. People were talking softly, drinking tea or whiskey from my father's stock. I sat in the corner of the living room, watching Kimberly's confident manner, offering snacks to guests, showing them where the bathroom was, accepting condolences with a slight but appropriate sadness on her face. She always knew how to play the parts. By 6 p.m., everyone had dispersed, and it was just the three of us, me, Kimberly, and Dalton. He went straight upstairs, citing a headache, and my sister and I silently cleaned up the dishes in the kitchen. "How long do you plan to stay?" she asked, not looking at me. "I don't know. I have to sort through my father's things, take care of the formalities." I put a plate in the dishwasher. "I'm on vacation for 2 weeks. 2 days will be fine," Kimberly said. "I'll take care of it." I turned to her. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have no business being here." She finally looked at me, and I could see the familiar coldness in her eyes. "You left 3 years ago, leaving your father behind. There's no point in playing the good daughter now." "I didn't leave him. I just started my own life. And in case you've forgotten, he practically threw me out when I refused to go to law school like he wanted." "Poor little Hazel." Kimberly's voice was laced with venom. "Always the victim of circumstance. You know what I think? You just ran away because it's easier. You've always been weak." I felt anger rising inside, an old, familiar reaction to my sister's outbursts. "You know what, Kim? I'm not going to make excuses for you. Not for anything. That was my father, too. And I have a right to be in this house for as long as I see fit." She grinned. "This house is mine now. I took care of my father for the last few years. I paid for the roof repairs and the new boiler. Unlike you, I've been here. And yes, you can rest assured, my father left the house to me." "You're so sure about that?" I asked, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples. "Absolutely." She wiped her hands with the towel and hung it on the hook, neat as ever. "Dad always said the house should stay in the family, and you even have a different last name now. That was a low blow. I'd kept my maiden name after a short, failed marriage, but Kimberly certainly couldn't pass up the opportunity to tease me. Besides," she continued, "you don't need a house. You have a job in Portland, an apartment there. Dalton and I are here doing business in Auburn. It makes sense." "What business?" I chuckled. "Last I heard, Dalton's store went out of business, and you're working at a bank as a clerk." Kimberly's face contorted with rage. "Don't you talk about my husband like that. He's a talented entrepreneur. He's just been unlucky. And now we'll have a chance to start over, rent-free in our own home." "So you're already sharing the skin of an unkilled bear?" I shook my head. "Typical of you, Kim." "This house is mine, and you'll be on welfare," she shouted, her voice breaking into a shriek. "You'll get your pittance from your father's insurance and go back to your boring life as a nurse changing old people's boats." I looked at my sister and saw how years of resentment and jealousy had distorted her once pretty face. Kimberly had always been jealous of my father, though in truth he was equally cold to both of us, just in different ways. "You know what?" I said calmly. "Let's not quarrel over my father's grave. The will be read by a lawyer and we'll know his will. In the meantime, I'm staying here whether you like it or not." Kimberly glared at me. "Whatever you say. But don't get too comfortable. Alan Pierce will read the will the day after tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Then everything will be clear." She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with dirty plates and a heavy feeling in my chest. Alan Pierce was my father's old lawyer. I remembered him, gray-haired, with a neat beard and attentive eyes behind glasses. He always seemed like a kind man, and it was he who would decide our fate in 2 days, mine and Kimberly's. Though my father had already decided it with his last will and testament, sealed in an envelope. I sighed and continued to put the dishes away. It began to rain again outside the window, and the house was oppressively quiet, broken only by the ticking of the old floor clock in the living room. I woke up to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. I lay there for a few minutes, staring up at the ceiling of the guest room, trying to realize where I was. The dim morning light was barely shining through the curtains. It was 7 in the morning on the clock. The house held its morning silence, that special, almost palpable silence of old houses, when even the walls seemed to breathe history. I knew Kimberly and Dalton were still asleep. My sister never got up before 9, and her husband seemed to prefer to spend half the day in bed. I dressed quietly and went down to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator almost empty, just milk, a few eggs, and the leftovers from last night's memorial meal. My father had never been much of a cook, preferring to eat convenience foods or dine at Donna's on Main Street. I wonder who bought him groceries in recent years. Kimberly? Doubtful. More likely Mrs. Wilcox, the good-natured neighbor who had always treated his father with some special consideration. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the wet garden. There was a whole day left before the reading of the will, and I decided to spend it sorting through my father's things. It wasn't that I was that interested in his possessions. I just wanted something to keep my hands and head busy so I wouldn't have to think about my fight with Kimberly last night. My father's office was on the second floor, a small room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, and a leather chair scuffed on the armrests. It smelled of tobacco, though my father had quit smoking 15 years ago when he was diagnosed with early-stage emphysema. Apparently, the smell had gotten into the upholstery, the old books, the heavy drapes. I ran my fingers over the spines of the books, mostly legal books, a few volumes of American history, a shabby volume of Dickens. Dad had been a lawyer until he retired 5 years ago. Not a very successful one, but respected in Auburn. He often took cases for free if he saw that the client really couldn't pay. I started at the desk. The top drawer was full of office supplies, paper clips, pencils, notepads with the Thornton and Associates law firm logo on them, even though my father had never had any partners. The second contained bills, receipts, bank statements, all neatly organized in folders. The third drawer was locked. I didn't find the key right away. It was taped to the underside of the desktop. My father was always fond of such detective tricks. The lock gave in with difficulty, the hinges creaked, and the drawer opened, revealing a stack of folders labeled Personal. The first folder contained the deed to the house, an old deed from his grandfather, insurance policies, estimates for repairs. The second contained medical reports. I flipped through them and froze when I saw the diagnosis in the latest report, dated last month. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma, stage 4. Cancer. Dad had terminal cancer, and he didn't tell us anything. Not me, not even Kimberly, who lived in the same town. Typical of him to always keep things to himself, never show weakness. In the third folder, I found old photos. Mom in her youth, smiling, with her dark hair loose, in a summer dress. My father is next to her, smiling too, which is rare in itself. On the back is inscribed, Violet and Hugh, June 1987. They met in 86, married in 87. I was born in 89th. The next picture made me frown. A little girl, about 5 years old, with red pigtails, on a swing. The caption read, Kimberly, age 5. But something didn't add up. According to the family history, the parents met in 86. If this picture is 5 years old, then Kimberly was born in 81 or 82, a few years before her parents met. I continued going through the photos, and my confusion only grew. There's a mom holding a baby in her arms, apparently me, and standing next to her is a girl about 7 or 8 years old, obviously Kimberly. Again, the dates are inconsistent. In the back of the drawer, I found a shabby envelope labeled Violet. Inside were several letters, from my mother to my father, judging by the handwriting. I unfolded the first, dated August 86. Dear Hugh, I'm so glad we met again yesterday. Your kindness to Kimberly touched me to the core. Few men are willing to accept a woman with a child by another. I reread the letter twice, feeling the ground go from under my feet. Kimberly wasn't our father's daughter. She was Mom's daughter from a previous relationship. Dad had adopted her when he married Mom. That explained a lot of things. The strained relationship between Dad and Kimberly, his aloofness, her constant jealousy. But why did they hide it? Why did no one ever talk about it directly? There had always been too much innuendo in our family, too many secrets. I continued reading the letters, and gradually the story became clearer. Mom had been very young when she got pregnant with Kimberly, just 19. The baby's father, some Victor, had left her when he found out about the pregnancy. She raised her daughter alone until she met my father. He fell in love with Mom and agreed to adopt Kimberly, giving her his last name. The last letter was dated shortly before Mom died. She died of a brain aneurysm, suddenly, when I was 16 and Kimberly was 21. Hugh, I know you've always had a hard time with Kimberly. She's stubborn and willful, like her real father. But she's a good girl at heart. Please don't leave her when I'm gone. You both are my family, and I want you to take care of each other. I set the letters aside, feeling heavy in my heart. Her father hadn't abandoned Kimberly. He'd paid her college tuition, helped with the down payment on the apartment she was renting with Dalton. But there was never any real intimacy between them. In the last folder, I found another surprise: financial documents related to Kimberly and Dalton. It turned out that over the past 3 years, my father had loaned them a total of almost $70,000, a huge sum for a man living on a pension. The money was used to grow Dalton's business. First, it was a sporting goods store, then a used car dealership, then a food delivery service. All the businesses quickly went bust, but Kimberly kept asking for money. The last document was dated just a month ago, an application for a loan against the house. Her father had refused to sign it, despite pressure from Kimberly. Written in the margin in his hand was, "Enough. The Thorntons don't mortgage their house." I sat there, surrounded by these documents, photos, letters, and I could feel the anger growing inside. Kimberly had manipulated my father for years, squeezing money out of him for her worthless husband. And now she was trying to kick me out of the house, claiming it was rightfully hers. The study door opened so suddenly that I flinched. "What are you doing here?" Kimberly stood in the doorway, already dressed, her hair damp from the shower. "I was going through my father's things," I answered, instinctively covering the folder of letters with my hand. Her gaze fell on the papers, and her face changed. "You have no right to go through his papers. It's an invasion of privacy." "He's dead, Kim. Someone has to sort through his files." I tried to speak calmly, even though I was seething inside. "And it looked like he had something to hide, or rather both of you." She paled. "What are you talking about?" "That you're not our father's daughter," I said bluntly, "and that you and Dalton have taken a lot of money out of him over the last few years." Kimberly froze like she'd been hit. Then she walked slowly into the study and closed the door behind her. "It wasn't your secret to tell," she said quietly, but with a fury that made me uncomfortable. "Whose was it? My mom's dead. My dad, too. We're the only ones left. And, I think it's time to stop all the lies and innuendo." Kimberly sank into the chair across from me, suddenly 10 years older. "I always knew," she said after a long pause. "My mom told me when I was 13. But she asked me not to tell anyone. She was afraid people would look at us differently if they knew you and I had different fathers." "But why continue to keep that secret after she was dead?" I shook my head. "I mean, it doesn't make sense. Because Hugh isn't my father." She said it with such bitterness that I flinched. "He never treated me like his own daughter, always kept his distance, always preferred you." "That's not true, Kim. He was equally cold to both of us. He just showed it in different ways." "You don't understand." She jumped out of her chair. "You were his flesh and blood. He was proud of you, even when you went against his will and didn't become a lawyer. And me. I was always a burden to him, a reminder of Violet's past that he'd rather forget." There was some truth in what she said, and it made me feel a pang of guilt. "And the money?" I asked quietly. "All those loans for Dalton?" Kimberly crossed her arms over her chest, as if defending herself. "Dalton was a talented man. He was just unlucky. All of his ideas were good. It was just that circumstances weren't in his favor." $70,000, Kim. Your father gave you $70,000. It was an investment. We were going to pay it all back with interest when the business was profitable. And when you realized that Dalton's next venture was failing, you decided to ask your father to put a mortgage on the house." I shook my head. "That's out of line." "You don't understand," she said again, but without the same fervor. "We were on the verge of bankruptcy. Creditors were calling every day. We needed money. And you thought it was safe to mortgage the family home, the one my father inherited from his father and his father from his father, For your ventures?" Kimberly was silent, staring out the window. The rain had intensified, and the drops tapped against the glass, making a strange accompaniment to our conversation. "You know," I said after a pause, "I think your father loved you in his own way. He just didn't know how to show it. And he really tried to help you and Dalton until he realized you were just using him." "Don't you dare tell me how Hugh felt!" She flared up again. "You drove away, leaving him behind, and I was there for him. I visited him every week. I took him to the doctors when he was ill." "Sick?" I picked up the medical report. "Did you know he had cancer?" She froze. "What? Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He was diagnosed 2 months ago. He didn't tell you?" Kimberly turned even paler, if that was even possible. "No, he said he had stomach problems, that the doctors had prescribed a diet and medication. He was dying, Kim, and apparently he didn't want any of us to know about it." We sat in silence, digesting this information. Dad hid his illness like so many other things in his life. He preferred to go quietly, not burdening anyone with his problems. "What are you going to do with the house?" Kimberly asked after a long pause. "If it goes to you." "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm not going to move back to Auburn. My life is in Portland." "You're going to sell it?" There was concern in her voice. "Maybe," I shrugged. "Or rent it out. I haven't decided yet." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. "This house means a lot to me," she said quietly. "No matter what, it's always been my home. The only real home." I looked at her tense back, her red hair in a tight bun, and thought about how strange life was. Kimberly and I grew up in the same house, with the same parents, but we lived in parallel worlds, seeing the same events in completely different ways. "Well," I said, gathering the papers back into the folders, "tomorrow we'll find out what my father's will is, and we'll act on it." Kimberly nodded without turning around. I walked out of the office, leaving her alone with the rain and her thoughts. The next morning was just as gray and rainy. Kimberly, Dalton, and I ate breakfast in the kitchen in silence, avoiding looking at each other. Yesterday's conversation had changed something between us, not made us closer, but at least it had broken down the wall of pretense. At 10:30, we got into Kimberly's car, a dark blue Ford that had seen better days, and drove to Alan Pierce's office. It was in an old brick building on Main Street, between the drugstore and the fabric store. The receptionist, an older woman with a friendly face, ushered us into the office. Alan Pierce hadn't changed much since I'd last seen him. The same neat gray beard, the same thin-rimmed glasses, the same attentive gaze. He rose from the table as we entered and shook hands with each of us. "Miss Thornton, Mrs. Haywood, Mr. Haywood." He nodded to each of us. "Please be seated." We settled into the leather chairs across from his desk. Kimberly sat up straight, hands folded in her lap, her face tense. Dalton was squirming, clearly uncomfortable. I tried to stay calm, though my heart was beating in my throat. "We are here to read Hugh Edward Thornton's last will and testament," the lawyer began in a formal tone, pulling an envelope from a desk drawer. "The document was made and signed in the presence of witnesses 3 months ago. 3 months ago, shortly after my father was diagnosed. He'd known he was dying and had put his affairs in order." Alan Pierce put on his glasses and began to read. "I, Hugh Edward Thornton, being of sound mind and sound judgment, do hereby make my last will and testament regarding the disposition of my estate upon my death." The standard legal wording followed. I looked at Kimberly. She was sitting there with her teeth clenched and her face frozen. Dalton was tapping his fingers nervously on the arm of his chair. "To my daughter Kimberly Ann Haywood, née Thornton, I leave the sum of $20,000, as well as all jewelry that belonged to her mother, Violet Thornton, according to the attached list." Kimberly shuddered when she heard the figure. 20,000 wasn't much, especially compared to the value of the house. Dalton squeezed her hand, but she didn't respond to his gesture. "To my daughter Hazel May Thornton, I leave my house at 21 Elm Street, Auburn, with all property therein not separately stated in this will." I heard Kimberly draw in air sharply, her face contorted with anger and frustration. Dalton turned pale. as well as any remaining cash in my accounts after all debts and funeral expenses are paid." The lawyer continued to read, but Kimberly was no longer listening. She jumped up from her chair. "This isn't fair!" she shouted. "He couldn't do this!" "Kimberly, please sit down." Alan Pierce's voice was calm but firm. "I haven't finished reading the will." My sister stood with her fists clenched, her face red with anger. Dalton tugged at her sleeve, and she reluctantly sank back into her chair, glaring at me. "Go on, Mr. Pierce," I said, trying to stay calm, though everything was turning inside. I didn't expect my father to leave me the house. I thought he'd rather sell it and split the money between Kimberly and me, or at least leave it to us to share. The lawyer coughed and continued. "However, the transfer of the house to my daughter Hazel May Thornton is subject to the following condition. Within 1 year of my death, a portion of the house, namely the annex with a separate entrance on the garden side, is to be converted into a small medical clinic for the low-income residents of Auburn. For this purpose, I am setting aside an additional $50,000 from my insurance policy." I froze, not believing my ears. A clinic? In our house? We had actually discussed it with my father, but it had been so long ago. I was 18, just entering medical school. We were sitting in the garden on a warm summer evening, and I, full of youthful idealism, was talking about my dream of opening a small free clinic for those who couldn't afford health insurance. My father listened with unusual interest, asking questions. And then, when I finished, he simply said, "That's a good idea, Hayes. Maybe someday." I thought he'd forgotten about that conversation, but apparently he hadn't. "I am placing it upon my executor, Alan Pierce, to see that this condition is enforced. If the clinic is not opened within the time specified, the house is to be sold and the proceeds divided equally between my daughters." Kimberly straightened in her chair, a flicker of hope on her face. If I didn't fulfill my father's condition, she would get her share after all. As proof of the seriousness of this condition, I leave a letter detailing my motives to be given to my daughter Hazel after the reading of this will. Alan Pierce pulled a smaller sealed envelope from the same envelope and placed it on the table in front of me. My name was written in my father's familiar, angular handwriting. "This finalizes the disposition of my estate, signed and attested in the presence of witnesses, Hugh Edward Thornton." There was silence in the study, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of rain outside the window. I stared at the envelope, hesitant to pick it up. Kimberly sat still, staring at one point. "There are a few more formalities we need to attend to," Alan Pierce said at last. "I must get a formal agreement from you, Miss Thornton, to accept the inheritance on these terms. And you, Mrs. Haywood, will have to sign some documents to receive your share. I refuse to accept this will," Kimberly suddenly lashed out. "It's unjust, and it's made under the influence of illness. Hugh wasn't in his right mind when he wrote it." Alan Pierce took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. "Mrs. Haywood, the will was legally drawn up in the presence of 2 witnesses who will testify that your father was fully conscious and acting voluntarily. You have the right to contest it in court, but I must warn you that the chances of success in such a case are minimal." "This is all her fault." Kimberly turned to me, and I could see the hatred in her eyes. "You were always his favorite. Even when you moved away and left him, he still loved you more." "Kimberly, stop it," Dalton said quietly, putting his hand on her shoulder. "Don't tell me what to do." She shook off his hand. "It's all because of you, your idiotic business plans, your eternal, 'it'll work this time.' We lost everything because of you." Dalton turned pale and recoiled as if she'd hit him. "Mrs. Haywood, Mr. Haywood, please," the lawyer intervened. "Let's not turn this into a family scene. I suggest you think this over in peace. We can meet tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, when the emotions have calmed down a bit." "There's no tomorrow," Kimberly cut him off, standing up. "I'm hiring a lawyer, a good lawyer, and we're going to contest that will." She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Dalton followed her, throwing me an apologetic look. "Wait," I stood up too. "Kim, let's talk." She turned around and I could see tears standing in her eyes, a sight I hadn't seen probably since I was a teenager. "What's there to talk about? You got the house. You won. Congratulations." And she walked out, slamming the door so hard the cabinets rattled. I sank back into my chair, feeling completely devastated. "She'll calm down," Alan Pierce said after a pause. "Anger is a natural reaction to loss and disappointment." I nodded, unable to find the words. "Take the letter." He pushed the envelope toward me. "Your father really wanted you to read it." I took the envelope and slipped it into my bag. "Mr. Pierce, tell me, did you know about your father's illness? The cancer?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, he told me when he came to change his will, said the doctors gave him 3 to 6 months. He didn't want to burden anyone with his illness, not you or your sister. Typical of him." I smiled sadly, always keeping things to himself. "He was a complicated man," Alan agreed. "But he was a kind man at heart, and he was very proud of you." "Of me?" I looked at him incredulously. "He never told me that. He told me you'd become a nurse working at a hospital in Portland, said you were always taking care of others, even as a child. I think that's why he left you the house on the condition that you open a clinic. It was his way of supporting your calling." I felt a lump come up in my throat. My father had never said anything like that to me. All I'd ever heard him say was a discreet comment about how nursing wasn't the most prestigious profession and that I could do better with my skills. "What are you going to do about the house and the condition of the will?" Alan Pierce asked, interrupting my thoughts. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "My life is in Portland. I have a job there, friends. I don't plan on going back to Auburn." "You have a year to think about it," he reminded me. "If you decide to sell, I can help you with the legal side of things." I thanked him and left the office with a heavy heart. The rain intensified, and I walked down the streets of Auburn without an umbrella, letting the drops mingle with the tears on my face. Kimberly and Dalton weren't home when I returned. Their things were gone too. They'd obviously decided not to stay under the same roof as me. There was a note on the kitchen table, written in my sister's familiar, sharp handwriting. "We're gone. Don't try to contact us. My lawyer will contact you." I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. Typical of Kimberly to always take conflict to the extreme. The house seemed strangely empty and quiet. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects from my childhood. The old clock in the living room that was always 5 minutes past the hour. The worn leather armchair where my father liked to read the newspaper. The photographs on the walls that captured moments from a past that now seemed foreign. Eventually, I returned to the guest room and pulled my father's letter out of my bag. The envelope was thick, made of expensive paper, with my name written in black ink. I opened it carefully and unfolded a few pages written in familiar, angular handwriting. "Dear Hazel, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer alive, and Alan has read my will. I hope you are not too surprised or upset by my decision to leave you the house on the condition that I open a clinic. I have never been a good father to you or Kimberly. After Violet died, I withdrew into myself, not knowing how to handle my 2 teenage daughters, especially Kimberly, who always reminded me that I wasn't her real father, even though we never explicitly said so. I know you think I'm cold and distant. Maybe I am. But I've always loved you and been proud of you, even though I didn't know how to show it. When you decided to become a nurse instead of a lawyer, I was disappointed, not because I thought it was an unworthy profession, but because I was afraid you wouldn't realize your full potential. But over time, I realized I was wrong. You found your calling, helping people. And you do it with the kind of compassion and dedication that I've always lacked. Remember our conversation in the garden when you were 18? You were talking about your dream of opening a small clinic for those who couldn't afford medical care. I listened to you and thought you were so much like your mother. She had the same big heart and the same drive to make the world a better place. When I learned of my diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, no chance of recovery, I thought a lot about my life, about what I would leave behind, and I realized that the only thing I can be proud of is you and Kimberly, my daughters, even if one of you is not related to me by blood. I've changed my will to leave the house to you with the stipulation that I open a clinic. It's my way of supporting your dream and perhaps redeeming myself for years of coldness and misunderstanding. I know you may find this condition burdensome. Perhaps you abandoned the idea long ago and don't want to return to Auburn. If so, you can always sell the house and split the money with Kimberly. I won't judge you for it. I'm proud of you, Hazel. I always have been. Love, your father. I reread the letter over and over until the lines began to blur in front of my eyes from crying. All these years I thought my father was disappointed in me, that he thought I was a failure for not following in his footsteps. Turns out he was proud of me. Proud, but he didn't know how to show it. And now he left me a house with a condition that took me back to my youthful dream, a clinic for low-income Auburn residents, an idea I had almost forgotten about in the hustle and bustle of daily life, but one that had once been so important to me. Could I have done it? Quit my job in Portland? Return to the town I was so eager to leave? Start from scratch? It seemed crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like it was the right thing to do. Working as a nurse in a big city hospital had never brought me full satisfaction. Too much bureaucracy, too little time to actually care for patients. And here, in my own small clinic, I could really help people, be close to them, see the results of my work. I walked out into the garden, despite the rain. The old oak still towered over the house, its powerful branches protecting it from the weather. I stood under it, as I had done as a child when I wanted to be alone and think. The decision came naturally, as if it had always been inside me, waiting for the right moment. I'm going to stay in Auburn. I'll open the clinic like my father wanted, like I once wanted.